Hi, Gary Cox here, and welcome to episode 3 of my conversation with Vice President of Business Transformation for Canada Post, Ian Kerr. Ian and I worked together. We had a great discussion about the power of a CI culture. So much so that I've had to break it down into some mini series episodes. And of course, this being number 3, we're going to be talking about how to shift your organizational culture. And he has some really interesting insights. If you missed the first 2 episodes, you want to gotta go back and watch those too, for sure. All right, so let's get into it and hear what Ian has to say. When I'm working with clients now, we talk about a CI program. Some call it Lean Six Sigma, some call it continuous improvement. The buzz right now seems to be operational excellence. Like it's all the same thing, just talked about in different ways. What happens in organizations where they want to shift the culture? They want to, because you talked about it being adopted, and you say, the adoption depends on the underlying culture. So how do you shift the underlying culture to adopt a program?
Well, one would say time. That would be one thing. But I do think this is where leadership does make the difference, right? If you're trying, so you said, where does culture come from? It evolves. But I think leadership can shift the evolution of the culture. And by being very focused and persistent on what the right culture needs to be, right? And that does come through all the usual, what gets recognition, what gets resources, what gets rewarded, what drives promotion and, end of year, evaluations and stuff, right? So there's mechanisms of disposal that management can use in a larger organization. But beyond those, and this is one of my earlier work experiences, I sort of thought there were 2 factors that I gravitate towards as if you're trying to evolve culture. I'm going to say 3. I'm going to say 3 things. First is you've got to talk about the culture you don't want as much as the culture you want, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's if people don't know what people, it's like, hey, show them what good looks like. But I remember the stories about how do they teach people, bank tellers, to spot counterfeits. They show them, it's like the more you touch good ones, it's like, okay, well, then you know what a bad one is. But I think when it comes to culture, it's about behavior. And so you got to also say the behaviors you don't want as much as the behaviors you want, right? So good, a good behavior is this, but bad behavior is this. Feels like parenting, but you kind of got to be explicit about that. I think the other thing that's always resonated with me is, by nature as human beings, we are wired for stories. And stories can take on a powerful change catalyst. You think of like a story, stories from our history galvanize and capture people. Even fictional stories can capture the imagination that helps people see something as to what you're trying to achieve that they would not see through training and through textbook, right? But a story that is connects emotionally and personally will motivate people to change, right? And the third, I think, the thing leaders can. So first of all, I think leaders have got to talk about what's good and what they want, but what they don't want. They got to find the stories that are really going to connect to people, and hopefully these come from within the organization itself, right? It could be a customer that people did heroics for. It could be, an employee who saved the day or whatever. But like stories that really speak to, this is what we need to be and why, right? That connect to people emotionally. And then the third thing, I call it symbols. Like, can a leader do something symbolic that says we are now different, right? And this is back one of my first companies I worked for. It was bought by Bombardier. That time, it was owned by the British government and then was sold to Bombardier. But it was a very traditional manufacturing firm. It had the senior executive cafeteria, like their restaurant, almost dining room, let's say. Okay. And they could get wine with their meal, and it was like nobody got in but this top people. and there were like 4 layers of dining down to like the feeding trough for the workers, um, and one of the things, because the CEO wanted a different collaborative culture, he collapsed all the dining rooms into one. So we're only going, and he spent money to create a really nice cafeteria. And he said there's only going to be one place where we all go to eat, and we all eat there together. And he spent the money on it to create this nice modern cafeteria. But then what was interesting for me was he would go there and he would realize that a lot of the other senior people weren't going there. And he would be like, well, what are you doing? So, well, I'm just eating lunch at my desk. They were a little uncomfortable, right? They like, it's not what we're used to. And some of them, yeah. And so he said, well, we can't just do this as a symbol and then not show the behavior, right? So he said, you can't be sitting at your desk eating lunch in isolation when we're trying to create a collaborative culture. You got to come down and be visible and be collaborative. And you got to sit at the table with people, maybe that you don't know, right? But this is him coaching his team, right? And he said, I need you there. I need you there at least 3 days a week in the cafeteria. So he created the symbol, but he reinforced the right behavior, what he didn't want to see and what he did want to see. Right. And then I've just told you a story about a change in culture. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So those are really 3 powerful things.